Hey everyone, my name is Prima. I'm here today to talk about hosting FleetDM on EKS. I'll start by talking a little bit about myself first. I'll just introduce myself and then I'll dive right into the topic for today. So, I'm an information security professional. I've been in the security industry for the past decade now. I've worked across a variety of industries, including but not limited to oil and gas, music streaming, fintech, analytics platform, and so on. I am a part of Twilio at the moment by the virtue of being employed at Segment that got acquired by Twilio in 2020. And I've been with, Segment Twilio ever since. So at Twilio and Segment, what we do is and on the security team, we have the need to observe and monitor activities on all kinds of endpoints. And for that purpose, we use an agent-based solution called OS Query. I'm sure a majority of you in the audience would be familiar with OS Query already, but for those who aren't, here's a quick introduction of what OS Query is all about. So it's a popular endpoint monitoring agent, as I mentioned earlier, and it gets queryable system information in the form of a database. So it captures a lot of the system information in an SQLite database that is then queryable like a regular database with your regular ands and ors and nots and select operators. And it started with OSX. So this agent was built for OSX first, but it's been since made to be available for Linux and Windows as well. The solution, when it got open sourced by Facebook back in the day, got so popular and so loved among the security community that they quickly released a Linux and Windows version as well. And this agent normally would let you query, the system by logging into it. So you'd have to log into the particular system where this agent is running and use this tool called OS Query I, and that's the thing that would let you run the queries. However, they built the capability for it to schedule queries and run queries at a regular interval using a daemon. And so with that daemon now, you were able to run all these queries at a scheduled interval. However, that was still very limited and not very scalable because it would have to be configured either system to system, or it would have to be configured via a popular deployment framework such as Chef or Puppet or so on. And a lot of kind of configurations, a lot of hand-holding would be required from the team that is trying to deploy it and run with it. So in light of that, there came another popular open source tool handling all of those things for you called FleetDM. Now, I'm sure you must have already heard about FleetDM or looked it up, since there's another talk at this very conference from FleetDM folks as well. So for those of you who don't already know about FleetDM, here's a quick sneak peek as well. So FleetDM is the OS query orchestrator, and it lets us run all of these queries that OS query runs, but at scale. So you can run, the query on tens of thousands of hosts at the same time. And it also lets us schedule queries, and then additionally also lets us forward these schedule query results into the seam of your choice. So that's a little bit about FleetDM, and the tool is definitely a leader in the space that it's been operating in. Very well maintained, and the open source community around it is so awesome as well. Big shout out to both Mike and Zach for running such a great company and always being so available. Whenever, I've had questions and I've asked in the community Slack, I've almost always received a response from either Zach or, one of the other engineers on their team. So I'm definitely a big fan, as you can tell. Yeah, so that's a little bit about FleetDM. Now, let me tell you all about how we chose to host it at Segment and why. So let's start with what we built. This is the entire ecosystem that we built. So you can see the way it's built at Segment at the moment is basically we have the FleetDM image that's stored in our ECR in one of our accounts. Then there's another AWS account. So this entire infrastructure is very cross-account because that's how our infrastructure team prefers it to be, and our cloud security team prefers it to be. So a lot of our kind of what gets processed where and what gets stored where is all distributed across different accounts. And in light of that, we have one account that hosts the FleetDM image inside an ECR repository. Then there's another account where the Fleet web application is running at the moment, and all of the supporting infrastructure around it, such as the MySQL database and the cache instance and the load balancer and so on. All of that is running in this second account. And then there's the third account where we have our SIEM running. So we have AWS OpenSearch as, formerly known as open source Elasticsearch instance running on AWS or AWS supported Elastic. That got rebranded and renamed later, so now that's called AWS OpenSearch, and that's running in a third account. So that's why there were so many kind of cross account communications that needed to be established and so on. And then of course there's the there are your actual hosts that are running in a different part of your network, and then they connect with the load balancer and the FleetDM web server via TLS tunnel. That's how it hits the load balancer, and then once that happens, all the traffic from that point forward is in the clear. It's not been encrypted by us, but however that's taken care of by AWS's own security mechanisms and so on. So that's how we've kind of designed it for now. And there were a lot of course, challenges in building this and setting this up. One of the biggest ones was that there wasn't much written documentation around how to create a lot of this. So I'm sure a lot of different companies and different teams have hosted Fleet on EKS internally, but might not have just written about it. So by the virtue of that, I think it would be safe to say that we were the first team to actually write it down and talk about this implementation. I wouldn't be surprised if we were the first team ever to host it in such a manner. But I would refrain from making such a claim, since sometimes people just build things and don't talk about it, and that's perfectly fine as well. So yeah, so I sat down and figured out a lot of this. Took me about 6 months to build this end to end. From the day I started writing the design document to the day we had logs, the schedule query logs flowing into Elk, was about 6 months. So the part that kind of took us a really long time was figuring out how we would set up the whole web server to this MySQL to Redis cache and that entire ecosystem. So at one point, what happened was we were trying to deploy the app on on our cluster, and it would keep hanging on us. And that behavior continued for about a week, might have been about 10 days. I was troubleshooting it basically day in, day out, just, splitting my hair around what the hell is going on. It was very, very confusing because there were no error logs at all. We knew the pods would run, then at some point it would enter into a crash loop, and it would back off. So it would show you, the cluster would show you the crash loop back off error message after a while, and that would be it. And there would be no logs, none whatsoever. And that was, very mysterious. So that took me a while. I started, debugging it kind of turn by turn, initially thinking, oh, is it the MySQL database? Is it having difficulty reading the database secret and the credentials and so on? Eliminated that, made sure all of that was fine. Eventually figured that it was the connection with cache, the Redis cache instance. That's what was failing. And the reason it was failing was because Fleet, at that time at least, did not support TLS connection to Redis. And the way it's set up in AWS is, if you want to protect it with a password, it is mandatory to turn on TLS. It will not let you set up a password without it. We did not, it took me a while to kind of add this two and two together, and finally, take the TLS setting off of my Redis cache instance, try to spin up the web server again, and then finally it would work. So, that was a little bit of debugging that took so long and confused so many of us. I'm sure Zach was very, very confused by this behavior as well, and just none of us anticipated anything like that. So, little things like those, they took a while to figure out, and that was one of the biggest reasons I realized that it would be a good idea to talk about it and to write this down, so that those who are trying to set up a similar infrastructure coming after us have something to work off of, and they do not have to reinvent the wheel in some ways, because this was a very challenging and fun process for us, and we learned so much. I learned so much about my own infrastructure and how things are set up within our ecosystem that I probably wouldn't have had the chance or opportunity to learn otherwise. So I absolutely loved going through this process, and I loved the challenge of it a lot, actually. At the time when I was going through it, it was probably a little painful, but in hindsight, that was probably the most amount of fun I've had in like last many years. So yeah, that's a little bit of motivation for you as well if you're trying to do something similar. So then some of you might ask, why set it up on EKS? Why could I just not set it up on either an EC2 instance or on a kind of physical box, as some of the other people have been setting it up so far? Why just go down this EKS route at all? So there were a few answers to that. One of the main ones is the fact that setting it up on Kubernetes, gives us the ability to maintain our entire infrastructure. Every single smallest piece of it is maintainable as code. And that provides, that additional visibility to a lot of our peers. It provides that additional scrutiny to it as well. And the deployment process ensures that there are no shenanigans done in the way it's set up, and everything is set up in a standard and maintainable manner. So that was the biggest motivation. The next one, and a very important one as well, was to keep the attack surface narrow. And by that, I mean, if we are setting something like that up, if we are hosting a solution like that on an EC2 instance, for example, then we are now responsible for maintaining that kind of underlying host. We are now responsible for patching it. We are now responsible for any vulnerabilities that might come its way, and we have to be on our toes at all times. If we host it on EKS, again, upgrades are kind of straightforward. What you see inside the code is what needs to be upgraded, is what we have set up. And infrastructure other than that is kind of abstracted away for us and is taken care of. So that's that much less infrastructure for us to worry about, keeping our attack surface narrow. And again, EKS, hosting things on Kubernetes, hosting services on Kubernetes, is becoming the industry standard. And that's what our developers are doing, right? So one of the main motivations for me personally was also to, just keep up with our developers, keep up with our infrastructure teams, just really get to see how they're deploying their services at this point. How are they maintaining it? What are some of the challenges and errors they're encountering? What might be some of the security measures they might want to bypass potentially, because that deployment process is so difficult, for example, that they might want to not have security be a thing until they can get their code to work the way they need to, the way they intend to, right? So to uncover a lot of these kind of data around what's the process looking like for our developers today, it was also very useful and important. That was a big motivation for me to go down the EKS route, and there was a lot of support and a lot of encouragement for it within our team as well. One, kind of example that I can give you of that is once I deployed my service, so FleetDM in this case, on EKS, our team was the first team to set up that kind of cross-account setup where the image that we're trying to deploy is hosted in one account, but it's run in a cluster in another account. That type of setup was a first for our entire company. And because I went through that path and kind of uncovered some of the mysteries of it, I was eventually able to help a lot of our developers build a similar infrastructure and a similar ecosystem, and was able to assist them in regards with a lot of the errors that I had encountered. So when they'd come and ask, I'd have an answer for them, an answer that I'd figured out in maybe a couple of days. I was able to provide them with, and like a few minutes, and they were able to go on deploying their services faster, and just increasing our devs engineering velocity in general, which was a really, really good kind of byproduct of the initiative and the project that we took on. And yeah, that's my jam for the day. If you have any questions and or confused about, how do you even start, if you're wondering how to even begin, please feel free to check out the step-by-step instructions that I've written down on Segment Engineering blog. It's literally called Hosting FleetDM on AWS EKS. And in that guide, I've also provided some examples of what the actual Terraform settings for a lot of the infrastructure look like. So if you want to set up your MySQL on RDS, and you want to do it as code, what would that roughly look like? Unfortunately, I cannot provide everything. It's not usable verbatim because a lot of the kind of modules and the settings that we use on top of Terraform are kind of homegrown ad segment and following the segment standards. So it's not directly completely translatable, but you'll be able to use, say, 50 to 75% of it is kind of, you can copy paste. And then some of the other bits you might have to modify to adapt to your organization's needs. And yeah, that's my presentation for today. Please feel free to reach out to me on Twitter, on LinkedIn, or on Discord, on or MacDevOpsCon Discord server, with any questions or concerns that you might have. I'd be more than happy to answer any doubts that you might have. And just wanted to put it out there that Twilio is hiring still. So do take a look at our, a careers page if any of the open roles seem to be of interest to you. We are still growing even in this environment, which is, I think a great thing. Yeah, thank you so much for giving me your time today, and I hope you were able to get some value out of this presentation today.